Hey guys, I finally made a Mosaic Crochet sweater. This is my Black Widow pattern using just the web section. This section here is worked in the round with absolutely no seams. And this pattern is not made using small, medium, or large. It actually goes by your specific measurements. You can also make yours long like a dress. You can make yours sweater length or even like a crop top. So let's head on into my studio and I will show you how to make this. When we are making this project, this is actually going to be one tube and it's going to be crocheted in the round in this part from like here to here. And so we actually need to measure the widest part that we have here. So that really depends on your personal measurements. And for me, I'm gonna make mine pretty long. I wanna make mine like tunic size so I can wear it with leggings and stuff. But if you wanna wear this like shorter, if you wanna do it maybe this length, then maybe this might be the widest part for you here. We're not gonna do any decreases. So all of this is gonna be one size from this side to this side. So if your widest measurements are here, I would measure around this part here. If your widest measurements are here or here, just take a soft tape measure like this, wrap it around yourself, figure out how long that is, and jot down that measurement. For me, the widest part that I'm gonna do is my hips here, and that is actually gonna be 49 inches. The best way to figure out your gauge is to figure out what kind of yarn you're gonna use. And for this project, I am using Pima 100, which I recently fell in love with. It is a very drapey yarn and it is a fantastic cotton. It is 100% Pima cotton. It is a little pricey, but I am so excited to make an entire sweater using this yarn, so we're just gonna go for it. If you wanna use something else, absolutely you can. If you have a project that you've already done using the yarn that you plan on using for this project, I would take that out and measure that, because for the most part it's going to be the same measurements. And although it is pretty easy to just hold up a ruler and measure how many stitches are in 1 inch or how many stitches are in 1 centimeter, but to get a really accurate count, you actually need to go to about 4 inches or 10 centimeters, because it'll be a more accurate representation of like the average amount of stitches that you will have in a wider portion. It looks like here I have about 4 stitches per inch, and it's like a little bit over. If I just took my count and said, okay, that's 4 stitches per inch, I actually end up being way off when I'm doing a larger piece, because this is actually a little bit more. So for the sample that I already have done here, it's actually 17 stitches in 4 inches. And when you divide that by 4 to see how many stitches you have per inch, it ends up being 4.25 stitches per inch. Like I said, if you're measuring this in centimeters, measure 10 centimeters and then you would divide that by 10. So now that we know how many inches we have around, which yours will obviously be different from this, and then we know how many stitches per inch, now we need to calculate all that together to figure out how many stitches all the way around that we need. The number around times the number of stitches, and this is how many stitches I will need in order to crochet this project all the way around. And we're going to write this down. And now we need to look at the actual pattern. So the Black Widow pattern calls for a multiples of 16 plus 1. And really that is for when you're doing the entire spider, which is this guy right here. But what we're working on is just the web part. So all we need to think about right here, because we're working in the round, is 8 stitches. And then we take this number and we're going to divide this by 8. So for my measurements, that would be 26 and change. So we are always going to want to round this because we don't need any of these other numbers here. So for me, this is 26. This would be 26 repeats. And finally, we are going to take this number and we are going to multiply it by 8 so we can fit it on the pattern. Multiply this by 8, and for mine I have 208, and this will be my foundation chain for the beginning of the pattern. All right, so let's finally do this. We're going to start with the background color, and for this one, obviously, I'm using black, and my web color will be this dark gray color. So we will begin with whatever number we came up with, and mine will be 208. And I'm going to count as I go, and I'm not going to make you watch me count, so I'm going to do this off screen. And now that we have our foundation chain done, now we are going to hold our yarn right where the hook is here, and we're going to chain 1 and go back into the second chain from the hook. So not the one that we just did, but the one right here where we were holding it. We're going to single crochet all the way across the chain. And stop before you get to the very last stitch, because we are going to do something a little different this time. We are not going to have a seam. It is going to be continuous. So when we add our next color, you're not even going to see it. I forgot to mention that I am using an H hook, which is also a 5mm hook. And I use this hook for pretty much every single project because this is my favorite. I've had it since I learned how to crochet, and honestly, I would rather find a yarn that fits this hook instead of finding a hook that fits a yarn. This is my favorite, so in case you're wondering, that is what I'm always using. And that's why I'm always using worsted weight yarn, because to me that is the best fit for an H hook. And if any of you independent dyers are out there, please, please, please make more worsted weight yarn, because that is all I use. I will sometimes go down to a DK weight if the yardage is right and the weight is correct, and sometimes I'll go up to a ran weight, but for the most part, worsted is my ride or die, and it is my favorite. So we are coming close to the end here, and before we get to the very last stitch, we're going to stop. And if you want to throw a stitch marker right here, right before this last stitch, and we can take this and actually wrap it around us to see how we're doing with the sizing before we go any further. You don't want to continue and find out that it doesn't fit. You don't want to do a measurement like this using just a chain, because a chain is actually going to get a lot smaller once you add single crochet stitches to it. So once you have a whole row of single crochet, this is a good time to take this and measure it, just to make sure that your measurements are correct. So as I mentioned before, we're going to do something a little bit different where we're adding the next color here. What I had in my previous tutorials was we would continue to the end and then we would slip stitch and chain 1. We are not going to do that. We are going to continue the color. So to do that, we are going to start the last stitch, and we are going to just pull through 1 loop, and we're going to stop. So when we have 2 loops here, instead of completing the single crochet, now we are going to take our next color and we're going to cast on. And everyone casts on a little differently, but I will show you that the way that I cast on is the way my mother showed me, which is just wrapping it around and around. And now that we have this kind of twisted on this side right here, then we just do a chain and then we tighten it. That's how I've always done it. I know there's so many different ways of casting on, but to me it's easy. Even when you have stuff on here, it's easy to do it like that for me. So then we are going to slip stitch with the new color through these 2 loops right here. And we're going to tighten this one a little bit and tighten that one. Okay, so we are going to find the very first stitch. You'll see right at the end here, there's 2 loops. We're going to go into the back loop only, insert our hook into the back loop at the very end here, and we are going to start single crochet through this loop to connect the beginning and the end together. And I know it's a little loose and a little awkward, but we're just going to continue. We're going to add a few stitches just so we have this going. So single crochet, and then we can kind of just pull this and put our hook aside. So now we have the first stitches worked on the top of the very beginning, and this is the end here, and we have this opening here with this tail, and we want to take this tail and put it on this side so it is closed up, because right now it's just open. So to do that, we're going to flip this upside down. So when we're looking at the bottom, we have this opening here and we have this tail, and we want to close this up. So we're going to insert our hook onto this side at the bottom here, right there, and we're going to go from the front to the back, and we're going to loop this and pull it forward all the way through, and then we're going to go back on this side over here and then insert our hook from the back to the front in the back like this. We're going to take the tail and pull it through now the front to the back on the other side. So now the tail is facing the back of our project, and we are going to turn it over to the inside, and just to make sure we don't lose anything here, we are going to tie this new tail to the tail that we just brought through and just make a knot. It's just to keep it in place. Tie these together to kind of get them out of the way, and it closes up the bottom there. And we're going to flip this back to the front so you can see what we ended up doing here. Now the bottom here is closed up now, and now we are going to continue and add single crochet with our new color, and we will stop right before we get to the last stitch. And now that we're at the end of round 2, so we're going to go into the very last stitch here in the top loop. We're going to pull through 1 loop, and we're not finishing the single crochet yet. We're going to hold the yarn down and hold it with our finger down here, and we are going to take the next color. I'm gonna switch fingers so it's a little easier to hold, and then just pull through with the new color, and now we are ready to start row 3, just like that. And now at this point we need to look at the chart to see what we're doing for row 3. So if you already have the Black Widow pattern, what I've done here is just blocked off rows 28 through 38, because that's all you're going to need when you're making this sweater. Because our background is this light color, which would be the odd numbers here, and the web color is this purple, which is the even numbers, and we are starting ours here with row 3, which is an odd number. We're going to look here, and we need to find this next row, which would be row 29. If we're working this pattern flat, we're starting with this column and we're ending with this column, but when we're working in the round, we don't want this and this to line up ever, so we got to get rid of one of these. So we are skipping this entire first row for the entire pattern that we are doing in the round. So we are skipping the first stitch and we are only working these 8 stitches over and over and over and over. So when we are skipping that first stitch in the chart, we are immediately going to be adding double crochet for the next 7 stitches. And this one looks a little difficult to see, but if you go straight down here, these first rows are always a little bit tricky, but once you get going, it's very easy. So there's our first double crochet, and we're doing 7 of these across. So from when we switch colors, we have 7 double crochet across, and the next stitch will be a single, and then we are repeating the pattern. So this is what we're looking at right here, row 29. Ignore this first entire row, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then a single, and then we're starting over again. We don't even need to pay attention to this because this is literally exactly the same. So after we do the single, another 7, and keep going around and around and around for the entire row. And here we are at the end of row 3, and if you end up with 7 double crochet here and 1 stitch left, give yourself a round of applause because you counted correctly. But if you do have 1 extra stitch here, or you don't have this stitch here, this is the perfect time to adjust your stitches. We are on the right track, and now we can insert our hook into this last stitch at the top, pull through 1 loop only, because we are going to now add our gray back into this one. So again, we're going to hold this yarn down with either your right or left hand, whichever you're more comfortable with, so you have tension here, and then we are going to pull the new color through to finish that single crochet stitch. You can pull down the black a little bit, but not too much. And now just continue across, and now we are looking at the chart once again. And for this part here, we are going to look at row 30, which we're ignoring this first stitch here. Don't look at it, ignore it, because we're crocheting in the round. Then we are doing 7 single crochet, and we are finishing with a double crochet, and we're going to repeat that pattern all the way around. So let's do that all the way across. And I know these first few rows are a little boring, but let me tell you, the rest of this pattern gets really fun because you get to make some really unique decisions on how crazy you want your webs to look. If you want them nice and clean, or if you want them broken and disturbed. This is definitely a fun pattern to work with. So we have 7 single crochet across. We are going into the double right here in the middle, and we are continuing this all the way around. 7 singles, 1 double, and then when we come to the end of this row here, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see this stitch right here, and this is basically the seam is hiding here. There's no seam. So cool. So we are going to begin the double crochet to end this row into the stitch down here, but we're not going to finish the stitch. So insert your hook, pull through 1 loop, pull through 2 loops, and then we're going to stop because we are going to connect with the new color. So like we did before, we're going to hold the gray down here, and then we're going to get the black and finish the stitch. I know it feels a little bit loose. You can pull the gray a little bit, but don't make it super tight because we're just continuing the stitches here. So the next stitches here, now that we are starting this next row, we need to decide if we want to have the bottom of our web to have a long strand, or if we want to just start continuing the rounded parts. And I have some examples to show you what I mean. In the original pattern that we have here, you can see this is kind of what we just started with. We can make these lines super, super long as we want to make them by repeating the rows that we just did. If we want to just skip all of this and just start making the webs close to the bottom, I think it does look a little cooler when there is a line here though. Makes it look a little bit more like a spider web when you have these longer lines, but that's entirely up to you. And if you want to make these lines longer, all you would need to do is just repeat what we just did, which is row 29 and 30. So at this point here, we have 2 sections already done. So I've repeated rows 29 and 30 twice. And now we get to decide if we want to make a solid scalloped bottom, or if we want to have some of them that are super long. So I have this little Barbie version of this sweater, and what I mean by that is we can do all even like this, or we can actually skip that and actually go longer. So this bottom row we can actually make them wider. And it really depends on if you want to make your web look nice and even and clean, or if you want it a little effed up, which I'm gonna make mine a little crazy because why not? So to start the scalloped part here, we are going to be doing a decrease in the next stitch here with 3 double crochet, and then another decrease that ends with a single crochet there, and that will start the arch. So to start with a decrease, we start with a single crochet stitch. So right here, single crochet, and then directly below it we're going to start the decrease. So yarn over, go down here, pull through 1 loop, pull through 2 loops, and stop. Then we're going to go into the second one, yarn over, go into the second stitch, pull through 1 loop, pull through 2 loops. When we have 3, we're going to pull through all 3, and that is a DC decrease. I know it's a little difficult to see with the black yarn. That's a decrease with a single crochet that starts. The next 3 stitches will be double crochet. 1, 2, 3, and then in these 2 stitches we are decreasing. So yarn over, go down here, pull through 1, pull through 2, stop. We're going down here again, yarn over, insert your hook, pull through 1, pull through 2, pull through 3. And now we are adding that single crochet right above this last stitch here. Single. And then the next stitch that we have is a single. And now I'm going to show you how we make this section a little bit taller. Let's say we want this one to be a lot longer and we want the scallop to be a lot higher up. We're just going to add all DCs in these 7 stitches instead of adding any decreases whatsoever. So we're just going to go across all DCs in the next 7 stitches. And if I'm going a little fast for you and you're not really familiar with the stitches, I would definitely recommend checking out the special stitches video. I will have that linked in the description, and that will take these stitches a little bit slower. I just want to show you how to do this particular pattern, so I'm moving a little quickly with this one. We'll finish the 7 stitches with 1 single crochet. And now we're ready to start the next row with gray. And with this first section here, we did the decreases in So we will have single crochet stitches here, and if you push that over, you will see a stitch down here to connect to on this side, and also on this side next to this section. So for that, whenever we see one of those, that means that we are going to be adding a diagonal stitch into the stitch right here. And the diagonal stitch starts with a single crochet at the top. And then in this hidden stitch down here, we're pushing this over, and we are going to double crochet into this hidden stitch down here. And then we are skipping the next stitch. The next stitch is actually the top of the decrease that we did. This is what we are skipping right here. And we are going to be doing single crochet into these top 3 regular double crochet stitches. So skip the decrease, and in here we are doing 1, 2, 3, and then we are doing a diagonal down, and the skip that we're doing is the decrease that we did here, this top stitch where they're both coming into one together. We're moving that over, and this is the stitch that we are connecting to for the diagonal down. So we are starting with a DC, skipping this stitch, and we're going down here, double crochet, and we're finishing the diagonal down with a single directly above it. So right above it, back here, single. Now we have this arch that we are forming this way. And the next stitch will be double crochet. And this column right here will always have double crochet stitches. It's just going to be one whole line for the entire pattern. And then this part here, I did not do any decreases. I did all double crochet stitches because I'm going to make this part a little bit higher up. So when you get to a part like this, you're not going to be adding any diagonals. You're going to be single crocheting all the way across the 7 stitches at the top. And then at the end of the 7 stitches, we have another double crochet in this line here. And now I have these gray rows finished, and these have the diagonals that are going over the DC decreases in the previous row, and then this one section right here is one that I did all single crochet across. Now we can take a look at the chart and also make some extra decisions on what we're going to do with the rest of our web design. Ha ha ha. So we just finished a diagonal up and down row. So we're looking at like row 22, and we're also looking at row 36 right here. They're both exactly the same. So whenever you see something that is the same, then we can decide, do we want to do 2 DCs in the same stitch, or do we want to add a diagonal stitch on top of that when we're working in the next row? And that is going to make either a wide web at the next section or a very skinny one at the next one over here. So we're going to look at the sky again, and down here you can see when we add double crochet 2 in the same stitch on top of a diagonal, now we're adding all these extra stitches here. And if we decide to do just a diagonal on top of a diagonal, we are doing a much closer stitch, so they're much closer together, and we get a much tighter web that way. So right now we have the diagonal stitches from the previous row, just like we have right here. So our next row, we can either do 2 double crochet in the same stitch, or we can do diagonals. Those are our options after a diagonal. So for this one, let's do 2 double crochet in the same stitch. and that is located in a hidden stitch, and all of these little corner ones will be hidden stitches in there. Let's move this out of the way so we can see it a little bit better. So we're going to do 2 DCs right down here into the first stitch. So we'll do 1, and then right back into the same stitch, and we're going to add another one. And then we are skipping the next stitch here, which will be the diagonal is what we're skipping, and then we're going 1, 2, 3 single crochet in the top here. 1, 2, 3. And now again, we're skipping this diagonal here, and we're going in there with 2 double crochet in the same stitch. So 1 and 2. And that's what this section looks like here. And when you're doing those, you're going to be making a bigger arch for the next section. And then this next part here, we'll do a short section. So we'll do our diagonal on top of a diagonal. So again here, we're going to start with a single crochet at the top row back loop, single, and then in this hidden stitch right here, double, and then again we are skipping this diagonal stitch. So this very next stitch we are skipping, and we're working in these 3 top stitches, a single crochet across. 1, 2, 3, and we are skipping this diagonal, going into this hidden stitch, yarn over and do DC into this black hidden stitch here, and finish the diagonal down with a single crochet right above it right here. And then we will add our next single crochet in the middle. This row right here, this column right here, will always be double, single, double, single, double, single. So this is what this looks like. This is going to be a bit longer, and this is going to be just one little curve across the top. And then we're back at this section here, which I did all DCs. So now we have all single crochet. And then we look at the chart here. After we have all single crochet stitches, we are next going to do the decreases with the 3 double crochet stitches and then a decrease again. So whenever you see a row that has nothing here, it's going to be this next. Also, you can see it's the same here. These are all single crochet stitches. This is what comes next. So then we'll do our decreases again for this section. Start with a single, because that's where the line is above the D, and then we will do our decreases. So now let's take a look at what we got. This is wide, this is skinny, and this hasn't even begun because we're going to start adding a rounded part at this part here. So let's do one more row on top of these to see how these turn out. So now that we are ready to work over these black rows that we just did here, we have this first stitch here is the 2 double crochets in the same stitch with 3 single across, and then another 2 double crochet in the same stitch. And we need to then look at the chart to see what goes over this, what can fit over this part. And that will be all single crochet stitches. So we have here the 2 double crochets in the same stitch. So we look at the top here, and this is all single crochet across. All single across whenever you see the 2 together on both sides. So this is just 7 stitches straight across. And then to finish this part, we add a DC right in the middle, as usual. Always add a DC in this section when you're working with the gray. And now we come to the ones where we did the diagonals. And these are the diagonals that are worked with the background color. So when we look at the chart, the only diagonals that we worked with the background color, it's not this one, it's not this, it's this one right here. So if we're doing a diagonal with the background color, which is the white diagonals, the next stitch following that is another diagonal. So we will work those here, and that will be a single crochet in the next stitch. And then we will find that hidden stitch in there to do our double crochet down there. And then we are skipping the diagonal, which is the stitch right here, and we are doing 3 single across. And then we are skipping this diagonal and going into that hidden stitch right down there. So double crochet down into the stitch here. And then single directly above that one. And finish that whole sequence with another double crochet. And now we're back to this section here, which is also the same as this section down here. When we have the decreases going in, these will be diagonals going in as well. So start with a single again. Double crochet in this hidden stitch. Skip the decrease, and we are doing the 3 single crochet across the top. Skip the decrease, go in down here, double, and then single crochet directly above it, and end with a double crochet in the line with everyone else. And now let's take a look at what we have going on here. So this one, we'll start building another arch after this one. This one is finished, so we're going to either add another diagonal in this part or 2 DCs. And this one will be also, because we have a regular diagonal, we can add 2 DCs or another diagonal. So we have so many options to make this web as crazy as possible or as simple as possible. If you want to make the entire thing just this section right here, go for it. It's exactly how I have done already for this part here. These are all just done all the same for the entire pattern. And then I have this pillow where I used just diagonals all across the top, which you can definitely do as well. And what I'm gonna do is actually pack up this whole thing, and I am going to bring this with me on my flight to the desert because I am running off to get married. So I will be back in a few weeks and I will finish this video, and I will have a whole lot more done because I have 6 hours each way on a plane. And yeah, that's also why my nails look crazy. It's because this is gonna kind of go with my wedding dress. So yeah, we'll have lots of fun with this project. I will see you very soon. Hey guys, I am back from my epic wedding / honeymoon adventure, and I wanted to do a quick work in progress video to show you where I'm at with my sweater right here. yeah, this has been a really fun project. I was worried that I'd get a little bored with it just being black and gray, but really every time I have to like decide if I'm gonna do like a big space or make them narrow, it's just like, it's always, it's an interesting project to work on. So I'm excited to kind of show you what I'm doing here. So for a lot of these sections, I've been keeping a lot of the diagonals kind of together to make it more like there's like holes and like breaks in the web every now and then sometimes I'll have like a big hole here, and then I'm gonna actually like finish the top part here, so it'll be these narrow sections again. So kind of like keeping it wild, but at the same time try to make it make sense so it's not just like chaos. It's like organized chaos, I guess. I don't know. And I am back, and we are ready to start working on the sleeve section. So when you have the length that you want, then you can stop and always make sure that you're finishing with the web color on your last row. And at this point, you're gonna wanna try this whole thing on, and you're gonna try and do some measurements to figure out where your sleeves are gonna be and how long they should be. So back to my little sketch here. When I tried mine on, you want it to be right above your chest here and right underneath your armpits. It's probably gonna be about an inch or two below where your actual armpits are, because this is going to pull down when we attach the sleeves and the straps, and just gravity does that. So when you're estimating how long you want this to be, just keep that in mind, that it's actually gonna end up laying a little bit lower. So we're gonna measure from right about this point here when you're wearing it, and then we're gonna measure from here to however long you want your sleeves to be. I'm gonna make my sleeves to be right above my elbow here. You could go a little bit longer, but you're gonna have a little bit of a wider sleeve here because we're doing it all as one continuous piece. You could also do a very short sleeve here if you want. So when you have this on, for me, mine ended up coming out a little bit further, so it wasn't really tight all the way across here. It was like gappy by, you know, I could pull it and kind of pinch it together, and I had about this much extra on both sides when I was trying it on. So we're going to keep that in mind when we are doing the sleeves. You want to account for that. So for me, this part here ended up being 8 inches from the inside part of my elbow to right under my armpit, but because there was that 1 inch gap there, I'm gonna say that this for me is 7 inches. And we're gonna have to go back to what we had here, how many stitches we have per inch. And for me, mine was 4.25. Your number is probably gonna be a little bit different. So we will take our stitches per inch and take the measurement that we have for the sleeve here and multiply those two numbers together. So for me, that was 4.25 times 7 inches. And that comes to 29.75. And remember that the pattern is 8 stitches across, so we need to divide this number by 8. So 29.75 divided by 8 to get how many repeat sections we're gonna need for the sleeves. So for mine, that's coming to about 4. That means that the sleeve part of my top will have 4 web sections. And then to get the exact number of stitches that we need, all we need to do is take the number of stitches in the pattern, times that by the number of repeats we need. And for mine, it was 4. And we have 32 stitches for one sleeve. And because we are now doing border stitches, we also need to add 1 on this side for border stitch. And we are also going back to a +1 pattern. So we are going to add another one, and this will be the number of stitches we need for the sleeve on this one side. And then when we get to the other side, we will also be doing 34. So make sure you keep track of whatever number you came up with for this part here. And before we do any cutting or anything, we want to mark where our seam is here I just put a stitch marker in here because I'm going to show you how to finish this part here, but you want to make sure that you keep track of where this seam is, and when you fold it in half, then you're also going to want to put a stitch marker on this side at the halfway point, because this is where we're going to start the other sleeve going this way. So just make sure that you're not losing track of where this is, because it'll be a lot easier once we get going. Okay, so now that we are at the corner here, we finished the very last row. I'm going to take out my stitch marker, and I'm just going to show you that before you get to the very last stitch, we are no longer going to be adding this. We can just kind of drop this in the back. We're going to add our very last stitch, which is a DC to finish this, and we will do a full DC without adding the new color, and that finishes it there. And then just to finish this, we'll do a slip stitch into this very first stitch here, and we'll chain one and tighten it, and then we can cut it for the first time. Now we are done working in the round. We are pulling it through, because now we are going to be working flat. And now we can take this one as well and cut the tail. And the tail of this gray one, let's pull it, put your hook through and pull it towards the inside, because we're going to be attaching these two together with a knot. Nice and easy. Just to secure them in here, you do a square knot, attaching these two ends together, and then we can weave these in. And I have a lot of different ends to weave in because I was adding more yarn, or there was a knot I didn't like. We'll deal with weaving all that later on while we're watching a movie and chilling out. So for now, we're going to leave these ends in here. And again, we're going to mark this one stitch here, just so we know where we're going to start our sleeve. And now, because the last color we used was the gray web color, we are going to start our sleeves with the background color. So you will cast on, tighten it, and we will start counting those chains that we figured out in the previous step. So for mine was 34. I'm going to chain 34. Once you have the appropriate number of chains, as we did before, we are going to chain one and go back into the second chain from the hook. So again, we will chain one and go back here, and then work all of these stitches single crochet across the chain for 34 single crochet stitches, or however many you have for your chain. And once you have your first single crochet row done, we're not cutting it, we are going to continue right on here. We are going to slip stitch into the top of this last double crochet stitch that we did right at the seam here. Go through both loops at the top of this double crochet, and we are going to be using this for the other side of the sleeve as well. And we are just going to slip stitch this on here, and then we are going to chain one to kind of hold it on here in place. And now we are able to continue crocheting all the way across the front of the top, and just keep going all the way to the stitch marker on the other side, and I will meet you over there to work on the other side of the sleeve. When we get to the end where our stitch marker is right here, this is the stitch right here that we are going to slip stitch into both of the loops at the top right here. So into both loops, slip stitch, and then chain one to close that. And this one chain right here, we're never going to crochet into. This is just to keep that tight on this last stitch right here. And now, just like the other side, we are going to add the other sleeve across. So just like we did before, we are going to add the chains that we need to match the other side. So for me, that was 34. So I am going to chain 34. And same as on the other side, you can kind of hold your finger right where your hook is here. We're going to chain 1 and go back into this hole right here, second chain from the hook, and continue adding 34 single crochet all the way across till we get back to this point right here. Okay, so I have crocheted all the way back to here. And before we cut this, we need to count and make sure that we have the right amount here, because remember, we started with a chain that doesn't count as the sleeve and doesn't count as the base. So if you tighten this one chain here, it's a lot harder to get into, and you'll kind of know if it's a tight chain, you're not working into it. So I've counted and I have the correct number that I need for my sleeve on this side. And when you get to that point, just like when we're doing flat mosaic crochet pieces, we're going to tighten down at the last stitch here, chain 1, tighten, and we are going to cut the tail about that long, pull through. At this point, we are going to go all the way back to the other sleeve where we started. And now we are going to work on row 2. So whenever you're working flat mosaic crochet pieces, you need to have 2 foundation rows, and these sleeves are no exception. So this is our first foundation row, and we need to add the second one, and we will start with our web color, and we start with a border stitch and find the very first stitch right here and insert your hook into both loops to start a border stitch. So we will take our yarn, pull through to make a loop, pull just the tail through, insert your hook back into the loop, chain 1, and single crochet back into the base, just like all the other flat mosaic crochet pieces. That's how you start a border stitch. If you're unfamiliar with how to do a border stitch, definitely check out the beginner's tutorial. I will do that one a few times in that video to show you how that works. But for now, that's our first border stitch for the sleeve. And now we are going to work single crochet, back loop only, across the sleeve here. And when you get to the base here and you've finished the second row, again, you're going to want to count to make sure you have the right number of stitches. And this time we have a border stitch, so you're going to have 1 stitch less across here. So for mine, I have 33 single crochet and 1 border stitch. And the reason why it's important to count is when you look closely here, we have that 1 stitch that we used to connect this chain right here that we're never going to work into. It's basically going to disappear. We're going to ignore it, and we are going to start working across row 2, again across the top of the base. So skipping that, now we are just working these stitches after this double crochet row here. So now you can continue adding your web across the front, however you like your webs, as usual, and I will meet you at the other side. And now that we are up to this part here, it's going to look really, really weird. And what I mean by that is, when we originally crocheted this part going in this direction, we started with a chain and then the single crochet was on the bottom. And the way that we correct that is actually flipping it so we're looking at the back of the row here. So it'll be attached at the bottom, and we want to see the chain at the top right here. So this is the single crochet row that we added. We want to see these 2 loops at the top. If you're looking at this and you're seeing just that one single chain at the bottom, you're looking at it the wrong way. You see these wider holes are at the bottom. We want this part to be facing up, and that is where we are going to start crocheting. And so we are going to continue this row from the first stitch here. Instead of going into this very top loop right here, which we would normally do if we were facing it the other direction, we want to crochet into, again, the back loop, which is going to be way further this way. So into the very first stitch here, the back loop, and we want to keep that front loop open for when we're doing row 3 of our mosaic row. So we're going to continue across, just adding single crochet stitches. When you're looking at it at the top, it's the stitch back here, the back loop of that single crochet row. And we are going to do that all the way across. It is a little awkward, but it gets so much easier once you finish this row. We'll go all the way across and stop when you have 1 stitch left. And when we get to the very last stitch here, we are adding an ending border stitch into both loops at the very end. And again, count to make sure you have the correct number of stitches at the very end. And then to finish the ending border stitch, we are chaining 1, pulling down to tighten, and we are cutting a tail and pulling through. And again, this 3rd row will be a lot easier because these stitches will be right here and we won't have to find them. So now we're going to start back on the other side. We can actually take this stitch marker out because we know where we're going. So we will head back onto the other side for the first sleeve and start working on row 3. And for row 3, we can pick up our chart again to make some decisions on if we want to start our sleeves with a longer space here, or if we just want to jump into these angles up here. And I think for mine, I am going to start mine at row 31 and not add this extra space here. But if you want to have that look like that, you can start yours at row 29. And just like before, we are starting with a border stitch in the first stitch here. And we are going back to our background color. And now we are going to start row 31. And this time we are following all of the rows. So before we were ignoring this first column here, when we were doing the sleeves, we are doing all of the stitches. So we are starting right here. So this first stitch here would be a single crochet. And then we can start following the pattern, and mine starts with a DC decrease with a single crochet at the start. So I will work these 8 stitches, and for my sleeve I will have 4 of these arches across, and we will have this extra row here. So this is the +1 here that we will be adding this stitch right here on the sleeve portion. So I'm going to continue adding my rows here across, and I have row 31 finished, which is also row 3 on my sleeve. And when we look at the chart, row 31 ends with 1 single crochet stitch, and now this whole row here, this line that we see throughout this entire pattern, will be part of the sleeve and not the base. So we will add the last single crochet stitch for the sleeve and that last stitch there, and now it's all lined up. So now we can continue across adding stitches to the sweater base. And we are back at the other sleeve here, ready to work row 3 of the sleeve. And again, looking at the chart, we are starting with the very first stitch in the row. So the next stitch will be a single crochet on the sleeve portion. So we'll have this weird tail here, then we know we're looking at it the correct way. And we're going to start working on the sleeve. So the next stitch will be a single, and then following the chart on row 31, we will be doing the DC decreases, starting with a single crochet. And now we are ready to do the overlay stitches for the DC decrease, which will be directly below it here on these stitches that we had left open in the previous row. So we will continue adding the stitches all the way across. And here's what the end of the third row on the other sleeve looks like, finishing with one single crochet in that last stitch and then a border stitch on top of that one right there. And then we have row 4 started already. I started row 4 with a border stitch and then started following row 32 with the web color. So I'm going to continue adding this row all the way across and to the other side. Pretty sure you don't need to see that whole process again, but I guess the real question at this point here is how long are we going to make these sleeves? Now we got to do some measurements for our sleeves to make sure we're not going too long or too short. And for that, we are going to need the soft measuring tape again, and we are going to measure the widest part of our arm right here. Measure the circumference around the top part of your arm. And because we're only going halfway up on the front part, we're actually going to take that measurement and divide it by 4. So we're going to do in fourths to get the height that we want for this part here. And you also want to think about when you have the sleeve here, how loose or tight that you would like it. So for example, when you're measuring like this and you have it tight this way and you have your measurement figured out right here, you want to move the measuring tape a little bit so you have a little bit of give here for the top part of your arm. And these measurements don't really need to be exact because we can make the fine-tuning adjustments when we add the strap parts. And now that we have the 4th row of our sleeve finished, we can continue adding our rows to make the front of our sleeve halfway up, which will be a 1/4 of the circumference of our arm. Or we can stop at this point and start working on the back side. And that is what I'm going to do right now. We are going to start doing the back part so I can show you how we connect on the inside part here. So off camera, I am going to start with the same number of stitches that we used to make the beginning of the other side. And then I will meet you when we're ready to connect right here. And I have my 34 single crochet across for the back of our sleeve on the right side. And we are ready to connect to the main panel again. And we are going to be placing our hook right into the same stitch as the other sleeve right here. So this is the top of this double crochet that we had over here. So we're going to insert a hook into the very same stitch, into both loops again. And just like before, we are going to slip stitch. I know it flips around when you do that, but it's facing the right way. And then we are going to chain 1. And I know I should have mentioned it before on the front, but we're going to tighten it. And that way we're not going to go into that chain again because it's tight. And we don't need to add any more stitches over here. This is just to connect on this side. And now we can continue across the back of our sweater. And here we are again at the end of this row here, and we are ready to add the back part of the other side of the sleeve. And just like on the front, we're going to be going into this very last stitch here, which is the top of the double crochet stitch. Insert your hook into both loops, and it will already have a stitch in it from the sleeve on this side. And then we are going to slip stitch here, and we are going to chain one and tighten it. And now we are going to continue with our chain just like we did on the other side. We're going to count 34 or however many chains you had for the front side of the sleeves, and then do your single crochet coming all the way back just like we had on the other side. Once we have the measurements that we need for the sleeve and we are happy with the height that we have, again, this is going to be halfway up your arm. And then when we have these two panels, this is the back and this is the front, you measure these, and this should be half the circumference of the upper arm measurements that you had come up with. And mine, I ended up making about ½ an inch longer because I wanted to end this very last row up here with all scalloped edges like this. So there were some where I was going to stop down here, but then I would have had like a straight one. And I didn't want to have any straight pieces here. I wanted them all to have this diagonal at the top. And to finish this completely at the very top, we are going to add one more row of single crochet stitches, and this time we're going to go through both loops, and we'll start with a border stitch just like we did all of the other ones. And we will take our web color, and this just kind of adds one final edge, and we will do this along the top. We will do this on the front panel and the back panel separately. This will also even it out so it's nice and straight, and it gives a little more strength when we add the straps to the main part here. Okay, now we are at that part in the pattern that I feel like I have to always apologize because I'm about to tell you that we're gonna weave all these in. I know that's like the number one thing I hear from people, is the one thing they hate about Mosaic Crochet is all of these tail ends. But honestly, with a pattern like this, if you wanna just leave these or even like add some more fringe, some long pieces, some chains and funky stuff on the ends. I mean, this is a spider web, so go crazy if you want to. I am going to weave all of these in. And what we do is we want to get on the inside, and I'll show you quickly an easy way to weave these in. And I do them all at the same time, put on a movie or a series, and just go nuts weaving these in. So we want to skip this border stitch here, and the reason why is when we're weaving these in, it's kind of pulling the border stitch over, and therefore we're seeing less of it on the outside edge. See, this one here is far enough away that it will pull it over, so we're going to find these loops that go up and down and find the tight loops, and we're just going to weave in our needle first, and we'll go through like 7 or 8 of these, and that should be plenty to get this tail out of the way. Once we have the needle in, we will line this eye up to the end here, and we are going to insert the tail into the eye just a little bit, not all the way, and then we pull through, and we'll pull through a bit so it is pulling this border stitch inwards, but don't pull the design. You want to kind of straighten out the design so it's not tight on this side here. And after we're done weaving in all of those, we have these 2 tails right here from when we started that very first row, and I want to show you how to get these to be, we want them to be in here. Right now this one is on the outside, so we want to take our hook end, push it so it's going through the back onto the inside part here. So what we can do is just take our hook and right about where this seam is here, you can kind of find any spot here to put our hook in. We just want to get this tail from the front into the back on this side here. So now it's back here, and now the other one is already facing the back, but it's all the way over here on the sleeve. We want it to be back down here where this one is on this side. So same thing, we're going to insert our hook. This one came through this way. We're gonna go a little bit under here, right under this gray one right there, and just kind of loop this back so they're both through the back. And now we can do a square knot to tie these two together, and then we will weave these in also. So we'll do a quick little knot to tie these, and then we will weave these in as well. And now that we have all of our edges all cleaned up, it's time to seal up the bottom of the sleeve here. And there are a couple of ways to do this. We're going to fold this over so the fronts are facing each other. So we're basically just turning this thing inside out. So now this is the very bottom of the sleeve, and we have the front sides facing each other, and this would be the top. And what you can do if you want is actually just whip stitch this closed with a needle and some yarn. But for our project, I am going to slip stitch this shut because I know more people like crocheting than they do sewing. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but we are just gonna find the big holes at the bottom. This is the bottom of the chain, and so they should be pretty easy. You can kind of even see the holes on here. Those are the holes that we're going to work into, starting at the very first one on this side, and then we can find it again on this side as well. And we always want to start with the opening of the sleeve here, not at the edge here, because if we're starting here, we're ensuring that it's going to be lined up on both sides. If we start over here, it is possible that we'll end up with it off, and we don't want that. So always start over here. And to make sure that this is nice and secure, we are just going to pull this first one through and make a knot. Again, square knot at the end. Doesn't matter how long the tail is because we're going to weave that in as well. And we can insert our hook back into that hole. And now we are ready to add slip stitches into here. So once our hook is in there, we're going to pull through a loop, and then we will find that next hole. Hard to see with the black. You can see it much better in person. We're going into the next one, and then on the other side, find the next big hole here, and insert a hook into the other side, just like this. Pull through and pull through. So we will just continue adding slip stitches into the big holes at the bottom, all the way across till we are at the armpit side. And when we get to the very end of the row, this is the last stitch in the sleeve here. We could go one further here to really seal up that hole at the bottom, and try and insert your hook into here, into the black. Do one more slip stitch. Might be a little tough, but we can get through it. And then we will chain one and tighten it, and then just for good luck, we will chain again and tighten it. And now we can cut it, pull through, and we can weave in this last tail right here, and we can weave in this tail through here. And let's flip this around to see how it looks. So we have a nice clean seam at the very bottom. And now we are ready to try this on to figure out where we want to put our straps. And the best way to do that is try it on and kind of hold it up and see like where your bra straps are, or where your tank top or whatever you're wearing underneath this might be. And then we will just mark that out, because we're going to actually use one whole section here to kind of be the guide of how wide our straps will be. Now I have mine marked out where I want my straps to be at the top part where my shoulders are. And the important thing you want to make sure you're doing is from this seam here where the sleeve starts, you want to make sure you have the same number of sections on this side. So I have 1, 2, 3 before I get to this one. And then on this side, we also, from the sleeve, 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to have our sleeve. We're going to probably have a different number in between here, depending on how big or small you're making yours. Mine has 5 in between. You might have an even number or an odd number, but the number you really need to be paying attention to is how many spaces you have on this side. It has to be even, or it's not going to be even. So that's what we need to do. So now that I have mine marked out here, I've also done the same with the back as well. So we are going to start with the sleeve right here. And based on the measurements that we had for the top part of the sleeve on this side is what we're going to be starting with for this side, and then we can adjust depending on how it fits. We can take that out, and we're going to insert our hook into the top of this section right here. So where we have all of these DC stitches, we'll insert our hook right here, and we will have 9 stitches across to this side, and that is how wide we're going to make our strap. Now, I was picturing my sweater having black straps, even though this ends with gray. If you want to make your straps the same color as the web, then you can definitely do that. It probably will look better than what I'm about to do, but I really want to have black straps on mine, so I am going to add black for mine. So now, while our hook is in the spot we want to start, we will cast on. However you cast on, there is no wrong way. Now that we have it ready to go, now we can do single crochet stitches across. So we will start with 1 chain in the very beginning, and then we are going to go back into this same hole to do our first single crochet stitch like this. And now let's take this tail so we don't have to weave it in later on, and we're going to pull it across like this and start adding our single crochet stitches into both loops across here till we get to this point on this side here. So we're going to weave in this tail as we go, and we will have 9 single crochet stitches to make our first row of our strap. And when we are at the end of our row and we have 9 single crochet across, we are going to chain 1 and turn. I know it's going to be a lot to turn this big giant piece every single time, which is why we're not going to. I'll show you. Okay, so after we've chained 1, we are going to go into this very first stitch over here, all the way back here, into both loops, and single crochet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way across to the end. And always make sure that you have 9 single crochets, so this is even all the way. We'll chain 1 again, and instead of turning the entire piece, we're just gonna turn this sleeve over a little bit. And then when we work the next row, we will turn back this way. This way we are not having to flip around a giant sweater the entire time that we're making straps. And it gets a lot easier to do the twist like this and like this when we're turning, and we're not having to move the entire thing. And then of course we can trim this to get rid of it, but we'll wait until we're done with this row. So again, we are going into the very first stitch here. Don't skip this first stitch or your numbers will not be correct. So all the way over here, and again we will continue across, single crochet, and then chain 1 at the end. So again, at the end of this row, we just chain one, and instead of turning it again like this and flipping the entire thing around, we're gonna just turn it back this way again, make it a lot easier. And if you can see, this actually twists this little corner right here, and what we can do is kind of take our hook out. Once you have it like untwisted, now you can get your hook back in here, and we can continue going across this way. So I find that to be a whole lot easier than turning the entire sweater every single time you need to do another row, because these are short rows. So I'm going to keep going with my strap until I have the same measurements that we have figured out for the arm section. So for me, that's going to be 6 inches more for this one, and then whatever you have measurements for yours, you can do that. And we are not going to cut it at that point. We're going to stop, and then we'll try it on again to make sure it fits and that our measurements are correct. So once you have approximately how much length you want for your strap, you're going to want to put a stitch marker in it or a pin to make sure that you can keep this without it unraveling. But we're not going to cut the yarn. Instead, what we're going to do is, this one I was working through the middle of the skein. So now for this strap, I am going to find the end here, and I'm going to work from the outside of the skein. Therefore, we're not cutting anything, we're not wasting any yarn by doing this. So I have my end here, and now we can start making this strap the same length as we did on this side, using the yarn from the outside. And you can just follow the exact same steps as we did for strap number 1, working on the same side. And once I have this strap done and I have tried it on and measured it, again, you can adjust it if you need to make the straps a little bit shorter, or if you need to make them longer. Just make sure that each strap is the same size, so they all have the same number of rows. And you can figure that out by just counting the edges here to see how many rows you have on this side versus on this side. And once you have the length of the strap that you want, when you finish, just chain one and tighten it. And then we are going to take about a yard of yarn here, and we can cut it because we are going to sew the strap to the other side. So now we can just pull through and make sure it's nice and tight. And now we can take our strap, and this is the back. We're going to fold it over to the front and find the spot on this side where it will match up right here. And then we just want to thread our needle, and we are going to double stitch this to make it nice and secure onto this panel right here. And then we are lining up again with this line right here, and we're going to put our needle through the front like this and pull through. And now before we tighten it, we are actually going to go from the back into the very first stitch of the strap right here, and we're going to be wrapping this way all the way across. So now we can tighten it, make it nice and tight, and we will do that stitch in the same spot again. So go through the front into that stitch that we started, through the front, pull through, and then from the back come up through where we just had our needle right here. And then make sure it's nice and tight. You want these stitches to be very secure because this is going to get a lot of pulling when you're wearing it. So now we're going to go into the second stitch right here. And if you want, you can kind of just fold this over. So we're going through the front and through the back of the strap in the same step. And we will make 2 of these stitches. Just like this. Make sure it's tight. And we'll go all the way to this right here to connect that side. And then when we have our last stitch finished to connect this, we are going to put our needle back so it is facing this side right here. And so it is now in the back, and we can turn this over, and in the back we are going to make sure this is very, very secure. So what I like to do is find one of these stitches along here to put our needle through, just like this. And then we are going to go back through this loop right here to make a knot. And now I am going to weave this tail in so it is very secure back here, just like we weaved in all the other tails. Just find some stitches that are facing up and down. And I am going to actually weave this again back this way so it is very, very strong. I'm going to go all the way to the end of the strap and pull this all the way through. But don't tighten it like this to where it's pulling. You want it to be even. So make sure that is the same width as the rest of your strap. And then we can come back this way and weave in all the way to the end again. And then we'll just pull this through. Again, make sure it's even and it's not pulling super tight. And there we have it. The strap is connected and we can cut this. And we are done with that. So now I have my two straps for the top part connected. And now we can work on adding the straps at the very end here. So we're going to follow the exact same steps as we did for the main part here. Your measurements are definitely going to be different than mine. Everyone's got different shaped arms and everything, so you can make yours as long as you like and then try it on. If it seems a little tight, then you can just add a few more rows. But again, don't cut the yarn until you know that the other side, all the way on this side, you have the same length for both ends of the sleeves. And then once those are done, we are going to add the second strap right about in here. When I tried this on, it looks like the best placement for this middle strap for me is going to actually be not on the sleeve, but right in this section here. So I'm going to go ahead and add this one, and the other two on the other sleeve. But if you're trying it on and you think that it would be more supportive on your arm to have your middle strap right at the end here, you can definitely do that. So I have the end of my strap done here. Before we connect, we're going to add an edge to finish right along here, so we can kind of camouflage these border stitches at the very edge of the sleeve. And it's just easier to do it before you attach this part here. You could really add this last row here whenever you want. If you want it, just leave it like this. If you like the way this looks at the very edge, then go ahead and leave it. But I'm going to add one more row with black. And we're going to start underneath this first border stitch here and insert our hook. So depending on which sleeve you are starting with, your border stitches will either have holes underneath them or between them. So for this sleeve that I'm working on, the border stitches, the holes that you can get into end up being underneath them. But then when we start working across here onto this sleeve, because we were working in the other direction on this sleeve, these will be in between. So again, we can just cast on with our hook already in that first stitch there. And then we can start adding single crochet. We'll start with a chain in this one. So chain one in the very first one, and we can go back in just like we normally do with border stitches. And let's pull this tail in so we don't have to deal with it later. So we will do single crochet the very edge, and on this side it's underneath the border stitches. And what that does is just creates a black border at the very end. And now you can see that this very last row here kind of camouflages the last border stitch. You'll still see some of these at the very edge, but I think that looks pretty good. And then when we get to the underneath part of the sleeve, so this is the very bottom where the two chains were sewn together, now we will just add one more single crochet in this last one here, and then we'll just continue across. Here's the other bottom chain, add one through here, and then now this is where the border stitches on this side are going to be next to it. You're not going to be able to get that hook underneath them, so for this one we're going to go next to it. So next to this gray one we'll add a single, and then in between those two we'll be able to get our hook in there. Just continue all the way across to this edge right here. And finally, when we're at the very end of our sleeve at the top, I wouldn't bother crocheting along the top of this strap here. We can end it right at the base here, and we will tighten this last stitch. We will chain one, tighten it again, and we can cut it, pull it through, and we will weave this tail into the back here. So now I have all of the straps for my top sewn on, and everything is attached and finished. This one ended up being about 2 inches long, and this one I measured was about 6 inches, and then this one a little bit longer at about 7 inches, 7¼ inches. I kind of liked how when I tried this on that this part was a little bit lower than here. This way the sleeve ends up being a little more fitted, but you can do yours however you like. And one last step before we call it completely finished is we still need to deal with the fact that this just is twisted. We need to take our sweater and we need to block it to make sure that it is not going to have that crazy twist in it. So if you want to know more about blocking and how to do that, I covered that in the part 2 of the Gothic Skulls bag tutorial. And I would block this exactly the same way, where you would wet the inside and the outside and then pin it all down and wait for it to fully dry before you take it off of the blocking mat. And then you are all done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you end up making a sweater of your own, I would absolutely love to see your versions of them. So you can tag me on Instagram at Sixel Design or on Facebook, and I can't wait to see how all of yours come out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.